My name is Michelle James, and I am the Senior Director of Alumni Engagement here at the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. This is Thriving in Times of Turmoil: How to Manage, Change, Overwhelm, and Fear. I wanted to take a brief moment to thank and introduce our speaker today, Marissa McKool. Marissa earned her MPH in Global Health from Rollins in 2015 and then went on to do a post-degree fellowship in injury and violence prevention at the CDC. From there, she took a traditional role in public health, serving as assistant director for a HRSA-funded public health training center, and then later as an executive director for a research center at UC Berkeley. After a decade of working in academia and government, she had hit her breaking point, and she needed to find a way to manage the stress that comes with most public health positions, stress that was really burning her out, and she was seeking for some balance. So she learned how to set boundaries, manage stress, and reclaim her time without sacrificing her impact. And now she teaches those of us who are also looking for those things find our own balance and joy as the public health burnout coach. So today, Marissa is going to teach us how to navigate the chaos and crisis brought on by the recent funding shifts, hiring freezes, political appointments, and everything else happening in our world. In this session, we hope you'll discover how to manage the feeling of overwhelm and fear that you're likely experiencing, regain control over your life and work, step up as a leader, and no matter what uncertainties lie ahead, find that balance that we all so need. So without any hesitation, Marissa, take it away.
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for being here. I know there's a lot going on. So carving out time to show up for yourself and be here and learn this is so crucial and so important, and is one of the reasons you're going to be able to make it through this challenging time, because you're already doing the work you need to do by prioritizing yourself. Michelle did a great job introducing me, so I won't go into any really more detail about my experience. Other than when I hit burnout, there weren't any coaches in public health helping with it. I actually had to hire a coach who worked with lawyers. And so when the pandemic hit, I started teaching what I had learned and what I went to get trained in to other folks in public health, because it was needed way before COVID, and then certainly during COVID and then during now. So what you're going to learn today is actually what I teach the women in my coaching program. I will say an hour isn't going to overnight change everything you're experiencing, right? I work with women for 6 months on average, but I want you to think of this as a primer. And at the end, I'm going to share some additional resources that are free and available that you can engage in, that you can sign up for and dive deeper and get support. I want to encourage you to shut down any distraction, shut down Teams, shut down your email, close your office door so you can be 100% present. Trying to multitask is not going to help you, right? It's going to contribute to that burnout, that exhaustion, that overwhelm. Being present and learning what you can do to feel better is going to help you. So today we're going to talk about how to navigate public health. Yes, right now with everything going on, but truly everything you're going to learn today applies to any time in public health. So we all know this, right? I don't need to go into full detail, but I want to just make sure we're all on the same page. What is happening right now with the political instability and the funding shifts and the layoff and the policy changes is really creating a lot of stress for the field as a whole, collectively and individually. But it's important to acknowledge that these things aren't necessarily new, in the sense that there's always political changes in public health and funding challenges. The degree, the frequency, the speed, the type that we're experiencing right now is new, and we want to acknowledge that. But in general, we face challenges all the time in public health, and those challenges create an emotional toll. Even under what we would call stable or quote unquote normal public health conditions, we experience an emotional toll working in the field. It's just heightened right now with everything happening. It's being intensified, and that burnout, that resentment, that frustration, that anxiety, that overwhelm is also being intensified with it. So today we're going to talk about what to do in the face of times like right now where there's a lot of uncertainty, but also the same skills you're going to learn today, you're going to be able to apply to any time in public health, because it's really about how do we respond to the challenge we're facing, whether it's funding cuts, mass layoffs, or whether it's not having enough staff on your team, or having a program come to an end, or not getting a renewal on a grant. No matter what it is, we're going to talk about how you can overcome it today. First, throughout today, I'm going to have some points where I'm going to ask to hear from you and for you all to engage with each other via the chat. So what currently do you find most difficult about overcoming and facing the challenges happening right now? Drop in the chat what you find most difficult right now. There's no right or wrong answer. I guarantee you what you find difficult, someone else does too. But what are you struggling with the most overcoming the challenges you're facing? Is it feeling like you're not supported? Is it feeling like there's so many changes you don't know where to start? Is that you don't know what to prioritize? Okay, someone says the public cheering on the cutting of the programs, NIH, CDC, the amount of unknown uncertainty, the destruction of the sector itself. Okay, yeah. Anything else? Some of the other stuff I've heard is feeling like not being supported by leaders, struggling because other people outside of public health don't really understand. So there's a lot of challenges we're facing right now. So I want to zoom out for a second and talk about the bigger picture of the mental, emotional, what I call a crisis in the public health workforce. The way I think about this is there's kind of two things. There are the challenges we experience in the field, both the intensified ones right now, but also the ones we experience on kind of the normal day-to-day. And then there is the skill of responding to any challenge we face in a way that doesn't create burnout. Okay. The challenges in the field largely can be out of our direct control. There are things that maybe we hope to change or we advocate to change, but we don't have full control over if they change, how fast they change. But the skill of how to respond to the challenges we're facing, we do have control over. We do have the ability to learn that skill, to utilize that skill. The problem is we've never really been taught this skill. APHA doesn't teach it. Our leaders certainly don't teach it. They don't have this skill. HR doesn't teach it. And we aren't taught in grad school. And this is no slight to Emory or any other grad school. I loved going to Emory. I worked at UC Berkeley School of Public Health for a long time. And I was on the other end of curriculum development, program development, meeting accreditation, right? And the truth is, across schools of public health, this is not taught. I remember when I left Emory and I went to CDC, Eve Brecker, who is the year behind me, asked me to write an article for the student newspaper about what life post-grad was like. And I sent her the draft and she called me and she said, "We can't publish this." I said, "Why not?" She said, "It's so negative. No one's going to want to graduate. We want them hopeful. We want them optimistic." And what I know now looking back is what I was experiencing was trying to navigate all these challenges of the hierarchy, the bureaucracy, the lack of funding, the high turnover, the micromanagement, all those day-to-day challenges that no one had prepared me for. And I didn't have the skill to navigate. And so you not having the skill, our colleagues not having the skill, our field not having the skill isn't our fault. It's just not taught to us. And when we don't have this skill, what we have seen the past few years between COVID and what's happening now, but honestly, even before I hit burnout in 2017, well before the pandemic, is an unaddressed emotional toll of working in public health, an increase in the mental emotional crisis among our workforce. This can look like not sleeping, bringing work home and taking it out on our family, on our partner, on our kids, being short and reactive. It can look like feeling unfulfilled, weight gain, not having time to work out. For me, my psoriasis was flaring. It has a huge impact on not just our physical health, like sleeping and weight gain, but our mental health, our level of anxiety and resentment and being short and reactive. And a lot of this is because of the challenges we face, yes, but also because individually and collectively, we haven't been taught how to face those challenges in a way where it doesn't create an emotional toll, where it doesn't take us out, where it doesn't burn us out. How to face those challenges without those consequences. We haven't been taught how to reduce our anxiety or our overwhelm or our fear or our panic under stable conditions. And so when we're in times of crisis like COVID, like right now, this is just heightened again. And I want to be very, very clear here. This is not about denying the fact that public health as a field often does promote overwork and burnout and exhaustion under typical conditions. It absolutely does. And that is part of the problem. But we don't have a ton of direct control over that. We can work towards changing it. But as you know, in systems work, it takes time to change systems. Waiting for all those things, those external challenges to go away or to change isn't going to help us in the here and now. And not only that, there will always be challenges, whether it's in public health or in another sector or just in life in general. And we can't always control the challenges we're facing, but we can prevent experiencing burnout as a result from them. We can avoid an extreme mental and emotional toll experiencing them. You have to learn the skill how. And I'm going to introduce you to that skill today. And at the end, I'm going to share some resources for you to dive deeper and for you to get more experience with it, for you to practice implementing it. The skill of this, I teach women in my program for about 6 months. So between this webinar and some of the free resources I'm going to share, you're going to get a really good head start on learning the skill and implementing it. But first, I want to share a little bit about why this matters, why learning the skill matters so much, and why your mental health matters so much, because essentially what that is what the skill is. Public health professionals, you, me, all of us here, really need to always be putting our mental health first. Now, this can feel hard because the field does not promote that, right? Our field really is embedded in hustle culture, this idea that you have to earn your rest, that you have to hustle, right? That you can't bring your emotions to work, all of that. But we do need to shift this, not just collectively as a field, but individually with ourselves to prioritize our mental health, especially during times of crisis and chaos. Why? If you are not taking care of your mental health, you cannot overcome the challenges you face. As you work to overcome the challenges you face, it will take twice as long and twice as much energy to overcome them if you do not have strong mental health. When you're feeling a lot of anxiety, it is so much harder to figure out what to prioritize, what to work on, to follow through on what you're working on, to think critically, to not make mistakes. When you are feeling overwhelmed by what's going on, that overwhelm shuts you down. It slows you down from working. When you're feeling panicked about what's going on, you end up doom scrolling rather than working or leading your team, right? So if the challenge you're facing right now, if you've lost your job, let's say, it's going to be so much harder to job search, to show up confidently, to show up in interviews with enthusiasm if you're drowning in doubt. If you're staying in the field, and you might be writing it out or you're dedicated to staying in the field, it's going to be so much harder to show up to work day in and day out if you're just drowning in feeling fear. Fear of what happens next, or swimming in survivor's guilt. Even if you've left public health or you're planning to leave public health, there is challenges no matter what sector you work in, no matter what organization. Learning how to prioritize your mental health in a way that helps you overcome those challenges is how you avoid burnout. And this is really important because what anti-science people want is for your mental health to suffer, is for collectively the public health field's mental health to suffer. Because what they know is that when we're drowning in doubt and fear and panic, we can't think critically, we can't problem solve, we can't make intentional decisions. We make rash decisions. We don't overcome the challenges we're facing. We're going to talk about this more in a second. But we all saw this during COVID. I want you to think of a leader or a colleague during COVID who was so drowning in fear and anxiety and overwhelm and panic that they ended up making impulsive decisions, making mistakes that cost the team down the line, that people had to redo, that they took out their stress on other people, were short and reactive. I bet we can all think of someone like that. Just because they didn't have the skill to overcome the challenges they're facing with prioritizing their mental health, with not being stuck in overwhelm and exhaustion. And if that was you, there's no shame. No one's taught you this skill. You're learning it here now. When you don't have the skill, you get stuck in overwhelm, you get stuck in fear, you get stuck in anxiety. And when we're stuck in those emotional places, the part of our brain that thinks intentionally, that thinks strategically, that thinks thoughtfully is turned off. That's why it's harder to get your work done. That's why you find yourself scrolling the news or jumping task to task or just sending quick emails to feel productive instead of working on what you need to work on. That's why it's harder to lead your team and answer the questions they're asking and hold space for them and listen to their challenges. It's why it's harder to leave work at work and you bring the stress home and you end up in a cycle of exhaustion, which I'm going to share a little bit more about in a second. There are a couple reasons why public health challenges feel so hard that we need to address before we talk about how to overcome them in a more helpful way. And I'm talking about both the challenges we're experiencing right now, like the NIH funding freezes, CDC data being removed, but also any challenge we have faced in public health ever and will again. High workloads, not enough staff, all of those challenges. Because right now it's just intensified. The challenge dial has been turned up to 100, but it was never at 0 and it never will be at 0. So we need to learn how to overcome the challenges we're facing no matter what. If you take what I'm teaching you today, if you join the resources I'm going to share at the end, and you really apply it and learn this skill, it will help you right now and well into the future. So here are the two challenges that make public health so difficult to work through. Our workforce wasn't built to support our well-being. It wasn't. When you look at the history of public health, our field was really built on hustle culture, ableism, white supremacy, the patriarchy. A lot of this, in many ways, is out of our direct control. Yes, we want to work to shift our workforce and the structure of it and how it operates. Absolutely. But that's not going to happen overnight, and we don't have a direct, immediate control over it. So we're not going to focus too much on this today. Where I want to focus our time is what you can do, where you can make changes right away to feel better. So the second thing that makes working in public health challenging is actually the human brain. And this is not specific to public health. This is just the human brain. We all have one. The human brain seeks certainty and control to feel safe. The problem is it's often seeking it in places where it doesn't exist. So our brain's main job is to keep us safe, to keep us alive. From an evolutionary perspective, that's the whole job of our brain. That's why humans have evolved. And our brain thinks control and certainty means safety. And so when we don't have control, when things are changing left and right, we don't have control over, our brain panics. When there is uncertainty happening in the field, our brain feels stressed and worried. And because we have a negativity bias in our brain, what that means is, evolutionarily speaking, thousands of years ago, when we were hunter and gatherers, it was more important to remember which berry was poisonous than which berry was delicious. Our brain built this negativity bias to always keep in mind the negative from a safety point of view. Now, currently, most of us, if you're on this webinar, every day-to-day moment isn't about outrunning a lion, right? But your brain still has that negativity bias. So what happens when there are things out of our control and things that are uncertain, our brain actually wants to focus there even more, whether you're aware of it or not. And when your brain does that, it makes us feel worse. And that's where we get stuck in worry and anxiety and overwhelm. And it leads to a cycle of burnout. So on the left-hand side, you see external challenges. This can be high workloads, a micromanaging boss, funding cuts, programs being shut down, anything external that is a challenge. Those challenges are out of our control, largely, and they do amplify uncertainty. And our brains hate that. Our brains hate the uncertainty. So what happens often is our brain actually responds with overwhelm, anxiety, and fear. You see that on the right-hand side. And when our brain is responding from this place, we operate from overwhelm, anxiety, and fear, meaning we make decisions from this place. We take actions from this place. When you are making decisions, when you're taking action from anxiety and fear and overwhelm, they're not as efficient and they're not as effective. We talked about this with the COVID leaders. Like, we can reflect on people in COVID where we saw this. Them taking action and making decisions out of extreme overwhelm or fear, they were less effective. I like to describe it as when you're trying to make decisions and take actions out of the overwhelm, anxiety, and fear, it's like you're swimming upstream against the current. You don't get very far, and it takes so much of your time and energy. And that's why it leads to exhaustion. The mental, the emotional, the physical exhaustion, which can look like being short with others because you don't have the capacity to be patient or hold space. Making mistakes because you're making impulsive decisions. Not having the energy to work out or to meal plan. And then this cycle repeats, and we get stuck in this cycle. Getting out of this cycle, I think a lot of times people think it's about eliminating the external challenges, what you see on the left-hand side. And listen, if we could do that, if I knew how to do that, I would wholeheartedly tell you how. Not only that, I think I would be a billionaire, right? Because everyone wants that. But it's impossible. There will always be external challenges. We can try to reduce them, we can try to change them, but in life, there will always be external challenges at work, at home, with family, with friends, whatever it may be. So trying to get rid of that completely is not effective and is not going to work. Instead, it's about changing our brain's response to external challenges so we don't experience overwhelm, anxiety, or fear. Or so if we do experience it, it's less intense and we can get out of it quicker. What anti-science people want, what systems of oppression want, is for you and me and everyone in public health to be stuck in this cycle. Because when we're stuck here, we don't have the energy to show up and fight. We don't have the energy to advocate. We don't have the ability to think as innovatively or as creatively, to build strategic relationships, to lead our team through these challenges or initiatives through these challenges, let alone enjoy our life, be happy. I know the next 4 years, you don't want to be stuck in this cycle, not just at work, but in your personal life and bringing it home, bring the stress home. The good news is you don't have to. You don't have to stay stuck here. You can learn how to change your brain's reaction to external challenges so you don't get stuck here. And you can learn how to reduce the overwhelming anxiety and fear so you can get out of it. And we're going to talk about that more in a second. But first, I want you all to decide right here, right now, intentionally, and I want you to drop in the chat, how do you want to show up to the challenges our field is facing? Do you want to show up feeling overwhelmed, feeling anxious, feeling fearful, feeling panicked? If not, decide right now intentionally how. Do you want to show up confidently, calm, grounded? Do you want to show up strategically? Drop in the chat how you want to show up. This is really, really important to make this decision intentionally of how you want to face these challenges. How do you want to feel facing these challenges? Doesn't mean you have to decide you want to feel like everything's great, nothing's a problem. But decide, do I want to show up feeling anxious or do I want to show up feeling empowered? Do I want to show up feeling overwhelmed or do I want to show up feeling grounded? Drop in the chat how you want to show up to these challenges we're facing. You know, I used to be a social worker. I can wait all day for answers. I want to show up well-rested and confident in my making abilities. Yes, we're going to talk about that. That's such a great intention. I want to show up with creativity and adaptability. Yes, we're going to talk about how you can do that. What else? How else do you all want to show up? This is where your power lies in deciding how you want to show up to these challenges rather than defaulting to the anxiety, the fear, the overwhelm that this administration, that anti-science people want you to default to. What else? How do you want to show up? It's okay if you don't know how to show up that way. We're going to talk about that. But how? What do you want? I want to show up with hope. Okay, yes, we're going to talk about that. These are all great answers. Here's why this is really important. And if you're still chewing on that, that's okay. But if you don't have a clear intention for how you want to show up, it's going to be really hard to show up that way, even with the skill. Because your brain has that negativity bias and is going to want to default to the overwhelm, to the anxiety, to the fear. You need to have an intention of what you want to, how you want to show up anyways. Do you want to show up in hope, in confidence, well-rested, grounded? Want to have that intention so you can use what you're learning today to shift there. Okay, so here is how we're going to break free from the cycle. There's 2 things you need to do to get out of the cycle, both during kind of this intensified time, and at any time in public health. The shift includes preventing getting into the cycle and getting out of it. So the first piece is learning how to direct your brain's response to an external challenge in a way that doesn't create overwhelm, anxiety, or fear in the first place. The other is to learn how to reduce the anxiety or the fear you might be feeling, reduce the intensity, and then let it go so you don't get stuck there and end up in exhaustion. Okay? Given the time we have today, we're not going to deep dive into both of these. So we're going to actually talk about the first piece. How to prevent the overwhelm, the anxiety, the fear from popping up when you're facing challenges. At the end, I'm going to share some resources, including my From Panic to Purpose series, which actually dives deep into the second piece. How do you reduce your overwhelm? How do you reduce your anxiety? How do you reduce your fear so you don't get stuck in exhaustion? So that resource is available to you. It's totally free, and I'll share the link and you can sign up. But let's talk about this first piece, which really requires a mindset shift. When you are facing the challenges that you have right now or will have in the future, in order to not get into overwhelm, anxiety, fear, we need to shift how we think about the challenges we're facing. And the biggest shift is focusing on what we can versus can't control. And if a lot of people have been kind of talking about this lately, but in a completely different way than I think about it. So what I'm going to offer you right now is probably what you haven't been hearing. In order to understand why we need to make the shift, we need to briefly talk about the paradox of control. That is, when we try to control things we cannot, it actually makes us feel more out of control. So the example I like to use, if any of you have toddlers or have had toddlers at a point, or I've been around toddlers, I want you to imagine you're in a grocery store and they have a complete tantrum, a complete meltdown, screaming, crying, kicking. You probably know the more you try to force them to change their behavior, the more out of control you feel as a guardian, as a parent, as a caretaker, right? Because you can't force them to change. But instead of focusing on what we can't control, if we shift that to focus on what we can control, we can feel more steady and at peace, no matter what's going on around us. So using the toddler example and shifting your focus from trying to force them to change their behavior to you, okay, what can I control in me? I can control my reaction. I can control my breathing. I can control how calm I am. I can control kind of what I'm thinking about the people looking at us. You feel so much more grounded there because that's where you can make changes. And sometimes your toddler gets calm in response to that, and sometimes they don't, because you can't force it. You can't control them. So I want to be very clear. When I say shift the focus where you have control, I do not mean the tasks you need to work on, the time with your family, going to a workout. I see a lot of people talking about this right now. Those things aren't bad, right? Shifting some of your focus and your time to thinking about the tasks at hand or spending time with your family or working out, those aren't bad things. Those are great and they certainly can help. But what I am talking about is focusing on what you're choosing to think when you're facing the challenges. So if you have a toddler tantrum in the middle of Target and you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Everyone's looking at us. You need to stop. This is so embarrassing. Like everyone's going to think I'm a bad parent. You need to calm down. If that's what you're thinking in response to that challenge, you are going to feel more overwhelmed and more frustrated and more anxious. Versus if your toddler's having a tantrum and you're thinking, it's okay. I can handle this. This isn't a problem. This isn't going to last forever. This is temporary. You're going to feel so much more grounded and calm. It's not about thinking, oh, this is great. This is not a problem. I love this. I love when my kid tantrums. No, but it's about thinking things that are more useful and more helpful to you in the moment. So we're not talking about focusing on the tasks you're doing. We're talking about focusing on your mental and emotional response to the challenge you're facing. So for examples in the context of public health, let's say the challenge you're facing is you want to speak out, you want to advocate, but in your job, you've been told directly or indirectly that you can't. You can't talk about what's happening. What you think in response to that determines how much anxiety and fear and panic you experience. If you start thinking, well, this is Handmaid's Tale, it's all going downhill, you're probably going to experience some anxiety and some fear and some overwhelm. Versus in response to that challenge, if you think, I can always find a way to advocate for what's right. I can get creative here. You're going to feel so much more empowered, so much more innovative. Notice this isn't about like positive thinking or positive affirmations. This isn't about, oh, it doesn't matter. It's no big deal. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about shifting your thinking in a way that helps you show up the way you've already named, right? Hopeful, empowered, thinking clearly, centered, calm. A similar challenge, right? If you found your leaders or your bosses are just saying, put your head down and get to work. Just kind of ignore what's going on out there. If in response to that challenge, you start thinking, well, they don't care how this is impacting us. Everything's falling apart. Everything's crumbling. They're probably on their side. You're going to experience a lot of frustration, a lot of overwhelm, and you're going to feel unsupported. Versus in response to your boss or leadership saying that, if you were thinking, I know my emotions matter. I know prioritizing them matters. and I can make space for this. I can figure this out. I can get the support I need. You're going to feel so much more grounded, so much more centered, so much more focused, and you're going to support yourself. The reason this is so important to really decide on purpose how you want to think in response to the challenges you're facing is not only because that determines what you feel or the intensity of the emotions you're feeling, but it also determines the direction you go, the actions you take, the decisions you make. So I want to illustrate this a bit further. Does anyone know who this person is pictured? Drop in the chat if you do. If you don't, that's okay. Anyone know who this is? Nope. Okay. Okay. So this is Viktor Frankl. He wrote A Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor. He watched his family be killed in the concentration camps. And he said, everything can be taken away from a person but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstance. Every time I read that, I tear up and I get the chills. Because what he is talking about is that there is one freedom no one can ever take from us, and that is the freedom to choose how we think in any given circumstance. No one can take that from you unless you let them. And that is the most powerful freedom we all have. That ability. Because what we think in response to challenges determines how we feel, the decisions we make, the actions we take, whether we give up or keep going. And what this administration and what anti-science people want is for us to be thinking the thoughts they want us to think. They want us to think there's no hope, everything's falling apart, the world is ending, this is Handmaid's Tale, there's nothing we can do. That's what they want us to think. Because when we think that, we're in a panic, we're stuck in fear, we're stuck in overwhelm, we're frozen in anxiety. And when we think that way, and when we're stuck in those emotions, we burn out and we exhaust ourselves. Then we don't have the energy to show up and do the amazing work and have the impact we can have, to be creative and innovative to overcome these challenges, to push back, to advocate back, let alone live a life where we're happy and fulfilled. But when you choose the freedom of your mind, when you decide what to think and what to believe in the face of any challenge, that's where you have control. That's where you have agency. Deciding to think thoughts that are helpful, right? It's not about ignoring what's happening. It's not about pretending everything's sunshine and rainbows. It's about thinking thoughts that help you feel empowered, feel calm, feel grounded, feel hopeful. When you do that, you take back your control because that's where all your power and agency lies. So here's why this is so crucial. And I talk about this a lot more in my From Panic to Purpose series, which I'll drop at the end. I'll share more about and drop the link. You can join. But overwhelm, anxiety, fear, they directly impact our decision making. And the reason why is we have two parts of our brain that really make decisions. One part is called the primitive brain. Sometimes I'll call this survival brain or the fear brain. This is the part of our brain that is tasked with keeping us alive. This is the part of our brain that we share with our ancestors from millions of years ago. It's a part of our brain that does the fight, flight, freeze response. And this part of the brain turns on and is supposed to turn on when we are in immediate life or death danger, because it's supposed to go into that fight, flight, freeze response to keep us alive. So that's why this part of the brain makes decisions out of fear. And we want to keep this part of the brain, right? Because if a car is driving at you as you're crossing the road, you want this part of the brain to be making decisions, to jump into gear, make a decision out of fear. So you jump out of the way, you start screaming for help, right? This part of our brain keeps us alive when we're in immediate life or death danger. The problem is when we are making decisions unconsciously, unknowingly to ourselves from this part of the brain, when we're not in immediate life or death danger. When we're making fear-based decisions at work about what to prioritize, how to talk to our team about these changes, how to talk to our communities about what's happening, how to form a policy argument. We do not want to be making those decisions and taking actions from this brain, because we do it from this brain. We're in fight, flight, or freeze. We're in that reaction mode. We're in that shutdown mode. We're in that overwhelm mode, and it's not helpful. The other part of our brain that we make decisions from, where we want to be spending most of our time in, is our prefrontal cortex. This is the part of our brain that humans evolved to have over thousands of years. It's the part of our brain that actually makes us distinct from other species. It's also the part of our brain that develops well until our early 20s. And that's because this part of our brain is the area where we can reason, where we can think complex things. Complex thinking happens here, where we can problem solve, where we can plan, where we can understand time, right? We can reflect on the past, we can reflect on the future. This is the part of the brain that we want to be making decisions from when we're facing challenges. However, when that primitive part of the brain is activated, because we're in overwhelm, we're in anxiety, we're in fear, we're in panic, the prefrontal cortex actually shuts down. Because if we were truly in life or death danger, we do not want the prefrontal cortex making the decision. If a car is coming at us and our prefrontal cortex is in charge, it'd be like, okay, what are the pros and cons? And how do we balance each? And what's the best way? We don't want that if a car is coming at us. We want our primitive brain to turn on and be like, get the F out of the way. But when we aren't in immediate life or death danger, and that primitive part of our brain is turned on and our prefrontal cortex is turned off, that means we're making decisions at work and with our family from that fight, flight, or freeze response. Not from reason, not from strategy, not from planning, not from thoughtfulness, not from reflection. And again, we saw this a lot with leaders during COVID, and they were probably very unaware that this was happening. But when we can stay in our prefrontal cortex and make decisions from here, we can plan, we can be strategic, we can make thoughtful decisions, not impulsive decisions. We can reduce the mistakes we make. We can show up as an anchor, as a source of groundedness for our team, for our community, for our family. We can think longer term rather than short term about the decisions we want to make and the impact they're going to have. So what we want to do is shift our thinking as much as possible from that fear-based primitive part of our brain to the strategic decision-making part of our brain in the prefrontal cortex. Okay. There are two ways to do that. The first is learning intentionally on deciding what to think in the face of any challenge. We just talked about that. That is the first piece, right? Because when we do that, when a challenge comes up and we decide intentionally what to think in response to that challenge, we are making decisions out of our prefrontal cortex and we stay there. Versus if our automatic response are those fear-based thinking, like everything's falling apart, there is no hope, that's our primitive brain talking. The second thing is when we are in the primitive brain, when we are in the fear-based thinking, the anxiety, the overwhelm, learning how to shift out of that thinking, out of functioning from that part of the brain into our strategic part of the brain. So you can reduce the intensity, the fear, the overwhelm, and get more into that strategy, that empowerment, that calm, that groundedness, that reasoning, that thoughtfulness, which again, I'll share in a minute some resources to help you learn how to do that. So remember how I told you it was really important to set your intention of how you want to show up to the challenge. Part of the reason is because this activity that I actually do with the women in my coaching program is such a useful activity to get yourself not only in that prefrontal cortex, in that strategic thinking brain, but keep you there and help anchor you back there when you get out of it. So I call this the triumph story. And it's really about thinking about a time in the past where there was uncertainty, when you didn't have a lot of control. Could have been COVID, it could have been a time in college, it could have been getting a divorce or losing a home or whatever challenge in your past might have been, and you overcame it. And what I often ask my clients to do is answer all these questions. We're not going to do all these questions on the call, but look at that triumph story. How did I overcome that challenge? What did I believe at that time that helped me overcome it? What did I tell myself that kept me from giving up? And you want to answer those questions because A, that gets you in that prefrontal cortex thinking. You're thinking strategically and from a problem-solving lens and from reflection and looking in the past from time. But then you want to use that and think, how can I replicate that now? If you found that the reason you made it through that challenge is because you kept reminding yourself, this is temporary, this is temporary, this is temporary, and that really helped you, how can you use that now? If you're looking back and you're saying, you know what, I got through that because I kept reminding myself I'm never going to give up on myself. How can you use that now? So I want you to think, and I want you to drop in the chat You don't have to answer all these questions, but what comes up with this triumph story? Is there something that comes to mind? A challenge you overcame? Is there a belief in the past that you can see right now that helped you overcome that challenge? Drop in the chat. We have all overcome challenges of uncertainty and not having control. Every single one of us here, because life is full of uncertainty and full of challenges. Drop in the chat. What is a challenge in the past that you've overcome and how did you do that? What helped you do that? You don't have to get all in the nitty gritty, but what was it? Was it a challenging financial time? Challenging time in your family? How did you get through it? I overcame it because I relied on my support system. Or I focused on the things that I knew that helped me keep grounded. What was it? Moving home to take care of my elderly parents, relying on support systems, those that had similar experiences. That's such a great example. And I had a similar experience. I did take care of my mom when she was really sick, right? And just notice relying on support systems, relying on those who had similar experiences. How can that help you now? How can you replicate that now? What else? What other challenges in the past have you all overcame? And how did you do that? Acknowledging that my fear of decision making was not making a decision. Acknowledging that my fear of decision making and not making a decision was a decision, and I had to consciously choose to not be paralyzed by fear and keep moving forward. That's such a good example. You know what you did there? That process, you actually got out of your fear brain into your prefrontal cortex. You probably didn't even realize that's what you were doing, but that is what you were doing. So how can you replicate that now? Can you notice where there are places where you're not making a decision? And can you catch them and say, okay, I'm going to choose intentionally to make a decision, even if it feels scary? And when you don't want to, or when your brain's scared, can you remind yourself, hey, I did it in the past, and look, it helped us. Overcame family emergency through talking with friends and continuing to work towards my goal amidst the changes. Such a good example, right? When you were talking to your friends, what were they saying to you that helped you, right? Were they saying, you can do this, you're strong enough? If so, how can you say that to yourself, right? Think about the people you've relied on, the support system, how they championed you. You can definitely rely on them again, but also think about what were they saying to you and how can I say that to myself, right? And continuing to work towards your goals. That is you engaging your prefrontal cortex to keep that strategy brain turned on. These are such great examples. And the reason we want to do this, when we want to reflect on our triumph story, is because we want to be able to show our brain that wants to go into negativity bias, hey, we've done this. We've overcome challenges and we can do it again. So when you reflect on this and when you revisit this, and when you look at your triumph story and look at what helped you overcome it and decide on purpose how to utilize those skills, those tools, those lessons now, it helps you move forward. It helps you be in that hope, in that groundedness, in that empowerment that you want to be in. Part of the reason this is so important, the triumph story and deciding what to think, is because what we are doing in public health, which has become blatantly obvious right now and during COVID, but we have always been doing in public health, is navigating the politics of public health. The truth is, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, public health has always been and will always be political. We have to accept that in order to move through the challenges we're facing. The reason that this is true is because public health has always been tied to government decisions, policies, laws, funding. And I often use this example. When the seatbelt law was enacted, right, public health wasn't mad that it's political. We were very happy that public health is political because that meant this law got to be passed to save thousands of lives. When the FIG grant was created and $4.8 billion was included in it, we were pretty happy that public health is political because it gave us all that funding. The truth is, We just don't like the politics of public health when they aren't working in our favor. But that does not change the fact that public health is political. It is. That is the nature of it. And accepting the truth, both that the politics of public health are the way they are, whether it's working in our favor or not, when we accept that, it reduces our frustration, our resentment, our pushback, our exhaustion. Because the cost of wishing that things were different creates so much unnecessary stress and anxiety on top of the challenges we're facing. And I want to be very clear, accepting that public health is political is not the same as condoning the political decisions. Those are two separate things. But when we accept that public health is political, we can take all the energy and the time that we unconsciously, for most of us, unintentionally, were using to resist that and get mad about it and be upset about it, individually and collectively, and shift that time and energy to strategic planning, to thinking critically, to adapting, to planning for potential changes, to being innovative, to being creative. And we take that energy of frustration into strategic action, which is the only way we're going to keep moving, keep evolving, keep innovating, keep growing the field, keep adapting the field, keep having an impact. So we need to reframe the politics in public health. Politics aren't bad. I know it's really easy to fall into that. Politics, as far as a political system, is totally neutral. It's just the system we operate in, both as citizens and in public health. Accepting that is so important. Now, it doesn't mean, again, condoning. We don't have to condone the decisions politicians are making, but we do have to accept that public health exists within the system of politics. Because when we don't, it immediately puts a wall up. It immediately creates resistance and tension and conflict, and it makes it more difficult to operate within the politics of public health without burning out. Instead, individually and in our field, we need to start asking, how can I be effective within this system? But we can only ask this question and answer this question when we have built that skill of responding to challenges from our prefrontal cortex, from the strategic thinking part of our brain. We cannot ask this question, we cannot answer this question, we cannot implement this question from that fear-based thinking, from that fight, flight, or freeze. Instead of thinking, how can the system go away? How can it stop? How can it all change? Which puts us on the losing end because we can't force that to happen overnight. It shifts that fear-based thinking into decision-making. Now, often at this point, I get questions about, well, what about dismantling systems of oppression, right? We know that our political system operates under white supremacy and ableism and the patriarchy and hustle culture, and that, increases inequitable outcomes. Absolutely. However, dismantling inequitable systems does not happen from fear-based thinking. It only happens from strategic thinking. And that's why it's so important to be in our strategic thinking brain as much as possible and not be in that reactive, fear-based, anxiety-based, panic-based thinking, because that's so ineffective when it comes to decision-making. It's so ineffective when it comes to leading a team and leading initiatives. It keeps us shut down. It keeps us scared. It keeps us holding back. It keeps us reacting without thinking, which is what anti-science people are hoping we do. So in order to overcome the challenges we're facing now and well into the future, there are 3 must-haves. Prioritizing your mental and emotional health. We talked a lot about this today, particularly the mental health point, right? Deciding what to think in response to the challenges you're facing. Deciding to think thoughts that are actually helpful, that don't shut you down, that don't freak your brain out, that keep you grounded and moving forward. The other piece is deciding how to process the emotions you are feeling to reduce the intensity so that it doesn't turn into exhaustion or burnout. And that I'm going to teach you more in the resource I'll share in a second. The second piece, which we just touched on briefly, is accepting the political nature of public health. Again, this is not necessarily condoning specific policies or specific political decisions, but accepting that public health exists and operates within the political system itself. Because when we accept this, we actually are able to let go of that paradox of control. Remember, the paradox of control is when we're trying to control something we can't, like a toddler having a tantrum. And when we try to do that, we feel more out of control. versus accepting my toddler's having a tantrum and focusing on what I can control. How do I want to respond to this? How do I want to think about this? How do I want to feel about this? What are the decisions I want to make in response to this? That's where all our power and agency lies. And the last piece is revisiting your triumph story. This is really, really important because our brain does have that negativity bias that's going to keep coming up. And with all the changes happening right now and all the news happening, your brain's going to want to live in that negativity. But if you can redirect to your triumph story, I've overcome challenges before, I've overcome uncertainty before, here's how I did it, here's what helped me, here's how I can replicate that, then you have a plan of action to get started with right now. So before we close out for a few questions, here's some resources, and I will drop the links in the chat in just a second. The first one I want to share is from Panic to Purpose. This is a 10-part video series open to anyone in public health, whether you're working in public health, whether you've been laid off, whether you're a recent grad, you're a leader, whoever you are. And this is specifically about navigating the current crises happening right now. So if you sign up today or anytime this week, you'll get immediate access to the first 2 videos available. Why mental health needs to be your top priority, and then understand coping with anxiety. And then this Friday, the next video being released is managing panic. So the anxiety and panic videos are actually where I teach you, how do you process your emotions? How do you reduce the intensity of them so they don't turn into exhaustion and burnout? So I deep dive in those videos. That's why we didn't go into full depth here today, because you can learn that in these videos. Future videos to come in this series, and once you sign up, you get emails every time a new video is released, which will be every Friday. We have a video on regaining control. We have a whole video dedicated to navigating the politics of public health. So if me talking about that today, you found a little resistance, you weren't really sure, that video is for you. We also have a video on reducing the negative thoughts, your negativity bias your brain has, on how to think more helpful thoughts and how to feel better. The other thing I wanted to make folks aware of is the Overwhelm Solution Challenge that we run periodically, but we're running it more frequently now given everything happening. This challenge is designed specifically for women, and it is free. Same with the Panic to Purpose, that's also free. The next round for this is March 31st. So this is designed really specifically for women who are still working in the field, right? Because right now with the layoffs and the funding cut, your workload might be higher than ever. The challenges you're facing might be more than ever. And so we want to help you navigate that in a way where you can reduce your stress, reduce your overwhelm, be more efficient, more effective, still have work-life balance, and prioritize yourself. So it's a 5-day challenge. Each day there's a live masterclass. We're going to talk about how to reduce your overwhelm, how to get more done in less time, how to create more free time, how to set boundaries, and how to succeed right now in public health. We're also giving away some exciting bonuses for those of you who join and come live, including a guide on how to delegate, a recommended reading list of books that will change your life, a podcast playlist all dedicated to improving your relationships, and many, many more. So I'm going to go ahead and drop these in the chat. If you guys have questions, we have about 5 minutes, or any comments, feel free to drop them in the chat. Someone says, thank you so much for having this webinar. Great resources. Excited to dive in and share them with your team. Yes, absolutely. You can share them with your team. The Panic to Purpose series, we have almost 800 people who have joined and been watching the videos. The Overwhelm Solution Challenge, that's a bit more of an intensive challenge. We've had about 350 women come through it and do the work. So feel free to share with colleagues or your team, or show up for yourself and then take what you learned and apply it to your team. Use it as leadership tools to work with your team. So any questions, any comments? There's nothing off limits here. If there's a specific question in your context you're in, your circumstance, a challenge you're facing, if there's something you're not understanding, if there's something that's clicking, an aha moment, something you want to reflect on that's making sense, anything, welcome, drop in the chat. Any and all questions, welcome.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any questions specifically in the chat. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank Marissa very much for her time today and for sharing so much wonderful information of why it's important to reframe our thinking in a way that can really help us manage these thoughts and feelings that maybe probably are negatively impacting us. Some very tangible ways we can take back some control, at least in ourselves, making decisions from that prefrontal cortex instead of that primitive brain. and also for the variety of tools and resources that she's provided to really help us practice these skills with intentionality every day, because I do think we have, like as she said in the beginning, you've got to turn off the distractions. You've got to be intentional about it. You need to practice this. This isn't intuitive. This isn't something we were born with. It is a skill that you have to learn and develop. And clearly she has done that. And I'm so grateful for her sharing what she's learned with all of us today. We did record this webinar, and as we do with all of our sessions, we will post it on our website. So if you're looking for it at any point in time, you can always go to our Rollins alumni web page. We'll also send it out to everyone who registered today. So all of you will receive the webinar in your inbox as well. Please share it. Please let others know. As Marissa said, this is, this is affecting everyone. So let's not keep this a secret. Let's put this out there. I encourage you to reach out to Marissa if she can continue to help you. She already, of course, shared some amazing things that she's already doing, but in addition to that, if there is a particular topic or idea that you have that you'd like us to consider hosting another session, please let me know, and I will do my best to respond appropriately and bring that together for you. I hope that this has been helpful for all of you. I hope that you're feeling at least a little bit more in control of yourself as you go forward today. Have a wonderful afternoon, and please do keep in touch. Thanks again, Marissa.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everyone.